Welcome to Connect to Develop, where we bridge healthcare, strategy, and leadership insights. Hey everyone, welcome back to Connect to Develop. For those new to the podcast, my name is Erika DeLeon, and I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Marney Reid. Today, we're picking up where we left off in our last episode. If you tuned in, we reflected on how last year's budget decisions impacted this year's outcomes and what to evaluate before building next year's plan. If you haven't listened to part one, I would highly recommend you going back, as it really lays the groundwork for what we're going to dive into today.
In this episode, we discuss strategic planning, aligning your budget with real priorities, identifying capacity gaps, and investing in the resources your team needs to truly execute the plan. In the 10 plus years that I've been creating and scaling strategic initiatives for medtech and healthcare delivery organizations, I've noticed that a great strategy without proper resources and a true commitment to the plan will invariably lead to missed goals. So a lot of you may be asking, well, what is smart planning? Here's what it's not. It's not just throwing more money at the problems or being reactive to challenges. It's really more, how do you identify what matters most, picking the vital few that you decide to fund, and then executing on that plan and really ensuring that your leaders have the room to not only just react, but to lead.
That's exactly it. So I really want to start by asking a fundamental question. Does your proposed budget reflect your strategy, or is it really just repeating the status quo? It's really common, and I've seen this in my experience, that it's very easy to default to last year's numbers and then just add in that inflation. But ultimately, if you haven't revisited why certain things are even being funded to begin with, you're likely going to be carrying all of those outdated priorities forward, and really by habit, not necessarily intention. So, that's the key question to kind of really kick us off in this discussion.
I totally agree with that. And, I really think the mindset of this is how we've always done things is more in the big companies that you see them getting into these kind of ruts. And what they should be thinking about is, okay, what worked before, what didn't work, and why? And then define your goals for the year that you're budgeting for, and then go backwards from there with, okay, if these are the goals and this is why, what are we going to do to hit all those KPIs? And you really want to establish early KPIs that everyone aligns on and that measure and that are short-term and long-term goals that you can say, okay, we're hitting the numbers, we're delivering everything right, we're setting ourselves up for success. We're not only bringing in the current plan, but we're also achieving the plan that we've projected for us.
Again, I agree 100%. I want to co-sign your comment about just the mindset of this is the way that we've always done things. It's so easy to fall into that. Again, habit, they just form. Sometimes you don't even realize you're forming these habits. And I would say that we're all likely guilty of it at some point in our career. So I would say that the best way to eliminate habit spend in particular, because we're talking about smarter planning for your budgets, is requiring every line item to tie back to a strategic priority, KPIs, OKRs, strategic objectives really has to be clear.
I love the alphabet soup, right? Every organization has theirs. I remember my first, goodness gracious, month at my last organization. I think I spent the majority of that month just trying to understand what that alphabet soup of the OKRs and everything meant. So in part one, we touched, as Erika just talked about, on assigning line items under each goal. And I can't emphasize this enough, because planning for a product or a new market or segment launch is really key. And when you're a small to mid-sized company that doesn't have the brand recognition or the sales force and the scale that the large organizations have, what you do have is you have nimbleness, you have speed, and you have creativity. And so that's where being able to assign line items under each goal and accomplish them is going to get you ahead. So what I've seen be really effective on driving those numbers are sales incentives, contests, proper training for your sales team. And yes, that does mean taking people out of the field. I know that the sales leads really hate doing that. But if you don't, especially in those smaller organizations or the mid-sized organizations, pull people out of the field to build the muscle memory and emphasize customer-facing training, you're doing yourself a disservice, because once again, you don't have the budget, the scale, the name brand that some of your larger competitors do. The reason I refer to sales training as building muscle memory, especially too, I've mostly cut my teeth in orthopedics, musculoskeletal. The sales team needs to hear leadership's messaging over and over and over again. They need to be saying the same things, rowing the same way. They need to understand what the vital few are and why they're the vital few. They need to really be aligned on the various stakeholders that are part of the entire sales, not only the sales acquisition, but the sales retainment process, and stay close to the mission and vision and values of that organization so they can feed off each other's energy and gain momentum. And what leaders may not know or you may not remember is that people in the field can tend to feel really isolated, especially as that remote worker, whether it's inside sales, external sales. And so those quarterly meetings and trainings to rebuild that muscle memory, create that strong sense of purpose and community drives true results.
Exactly. I love all of those points, Marnie. And so if we break this down into some actionable steps or considerations that we may want to factor in as we're seeking to plan smarter for the upcoming year, there are some key things that come to mind. So audit current capacity. So really reviewing where leadership teams struggled last year, getting very granular with that. What stalled? What slipped? Why? Identifying those patterns of overloads and bottlenecks. We talked a little bit about that during our last episode. Really deciding what must change. If your team is already maxed out, it's likely that something does have to give in the coming year. So you really kind of have to look at, does that mean there are additional hires that need to be brought in to help share the load, or redefining or adjusting those roles? And another key area in opportunity is considering bringing in fractional executives or consultants to provide that bandwidth without that long-term overhead. That is something that I see quite often. Another area that I believe is overlooked or maybe underappreciated is the investment in leadership development, and really, not just promoting high performance and hoping that they succeed, but allocating a budget and a line item for training, both in hard skills, soft skills, financials, projection execution, or project execution, better said, and just managing people, communication, navigating the matrix structures. Those are the things that I would say are hard to measure, but they're so critical to many of the points that I've made. Leadership development is not a perk. I would say that it is a strategic investment and a non-negotiable in my books.
I cannot emphasize that enough, and we're so aligned. And we talked about that a little in part one, where we'll often see, top individual contributors get promoted as people leaders. And without that training, very few of them succeed or succeed quickly, right? And I mean, that's at a huge detriment to the organization overall. There's that typical sports saying that just because you can play doesn't mean you can effectively coach. And that's so true in leadership development. Another thing is oftentimes leadership forgets that part of what makes an all-star performer is that they can kind of work a little bit in terms of a silo where they know what the overall company goals are, what their goals are, what the plan is, and they just go and they execute and they pivot on their own and they run on their own. And that's kind of the opposite mentality that you really want in a good leader, right? To going from strong individual contributor to servant leadership. And as someone who actually had experience with that, I was a top salesperson, President's Club, Rolex Club, Plan Maker of the Year over and over again in the field. And I didn't have really much of any training whatsoever. And I got put in to create an initiative that required me to be able to lead people indirectly because I wasn't their manager. I had no direct influence over them. And so if I could have rewound the time and spent, even just 2 months in some kind of professional development coaching or classes or things like that, I think I would have done a much better job launching that initiative from the ground up.
hmm I would also add just even clarifying roles and ownership, right? Like you were in that matrix leadership structure, so you were indirectly leading. And the more clarity on the scope that you had of being able to lead, it allows you to be more successful. Because as you know, anytime that you have any misalignment, you're going to create duplicate efforts. Balls are going to drop. You're going to have momentum that stalls. So, kind of going back to when you're budgeting, reviewing whether those responsibilities are clearly defined and whether ownership is aligned across those initiatives. If you have that clarity, then you're able to at least take that next immediate step in the right direction. I would also add tracking the signals of strain, watching for those missed deadlines, slow decision making, any risk of turnover, which adds a whole different, I think, risk factor anytime you have a high turnover rate in an organization. But these are all very early indicators of leadership overload that really require some budget fixes and just not necessarily operating under operational pressure, but being able to use your budget strategically to help alleviate that.
And that signals of strain, I bet that's something that in a small organization, people don't really think about too much. And I mean, burnout is real. It's real in large organizations, it's real in small, mid-sized ones, and those can have detrimental effects to the overall goals long term if you don't catch those. And an easy solve of, okay, let's, scale back for a little bit here, let's shift some of these KPIs over there. So I love that call out.
Well, ultimately, the question to go back to is, are you building a budget that funds true results or just revisiting those patterns and falling into repeat mode? Because if you're able to really position that question as a reflection, then you're able to start aligning around that. So, this is an opportunity to really design the year you want, creating a budget that's true to your business needs and that can serve as a blueprint. I would say that it might be challenging, but it's going to be so important to let go of what is no longer serving your strategy. I mean, bottom line, if it doesn't serve the organization, if it doesn't serve where you're heading, then that's something that needs to be considered to be cut, because not everything that worked last year needs to scale. And then not everything that missed the mark needs to be cut. So everything really should be reexamined through that strategic lens. And that's a huge part, I would say, of reviewing your go to market strategy, asking, did your go to market strategy hold up under pressure? And I know you probably have a lot to comment on this just based on, your arena. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I often see are teams that had really big plans for the year. When timelines shift or there's some kind of speed bump along the way, they lose focus and they can't necessarily regroup fast enough with the right messaging and momentum. And I think initially when people hear the term go to market strategy, they think, oh, that's a new launch, a new company, a new product, a new service line. That's not what I mean by it. In fact, really, it's about a continuous refinement and evolution, and then precise execution of your product, your service, your technology, et cetera, until you cross that chasm and you're into, quite frankly, what I would say is the, late majority segment. And so I feel like any company in the term of their business phase, they really need to be relaunching their go to market strategy and refining it until they get to that point. And so what I'd say is if you're seeing weak traction, find out if it's because the message is unclear, if the delivery of the message isn't consistent across all channels, and especially if the internal teams aren't aligned. And if or when that strategy falters, maybe time to bring in someone from the outside that could make a difference. And so for many companies, consultants can do that. They can come in, it's fast, it's less arduous than doing a full scale search for someone with a large title. And the idea and the role of a consultant is to come in with no biases, with no hidden agendas except to deliver the task at hand. And hopefully they can train up and get everyone realigned. And then, they segue out. And so, I really feel like that one of the biggest misses, especially in that small to mid-sized company, when you do your go-to-market strategy, when you're budgeting for the next year, is are you resourcing for the right things? And are you bringing the people in, both from an internal and external viewpoint, that can help you execute continuously down the field?
I love that, Marnie. And just a follow up question to that, because you touched on something when it comes to even defining go to market strategy. So, when you work with clients just in your field, do you find that you have to level set around defining, how are they defining go to market strategy versus what you're contributing and helping kind of level set around?
That's a great question. Usually, when companies bring me in, it's for a very specific thing, whether that's they need to create an entire branding strategy. Maybe they've had really good success in different service lines and they're trying to bring it to orthopedics or spine. Maybe they're trying to create an internal training and they've got a mixture of experiences in the field of their target customer and they need someone who's sold something in the large scale, that I have before. And then sometimes people just need a refresh of, hey, we're launching this critical initiative. What do you think? Are we going the right way? So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I love consulting so much is it's never the same day. Every company has a different unique need. And that's partly why, I'd love to ask you, I don't have a website. I don't have a menu sheet of the things that I offer. Is this a great product, service, technology that serves the patients of the physicians that I serve? Am I working with great leadership that I think is doing the right things for the right reasons? And is there something that I could offer? And it's really concierge and tailored towards them.
I love that. I love that. Well, I know we reviewed a lot of pearls here. So just as we wrap up, here's what I really want our listeners to walk away with and hopefully able to just gain some insights. Just remembering that your budget is more than just a spreadsheet. It's really a statement of what matters the most to your organization. So it's so important to treat your budget as a strategic statement. And again, not just a spreadsheet. Review your budget as a declaration of priorities, align your dollars with value, strategy, capacity, and not just cost. And then going back to those key questions, asking leadership, does this budget fund performance or does it just repeat those patterns? And I would say that this is a time to reflect, to assess, and to align because the way that you plan now will determine the results that you see next year. I'm a fond believer of that, even just in day to day. Everything I do today, everything I touch, how I plan is going to determine what tomorrow looks like and the rest of this week. So I know that this was super insightful for me, this discussion, part one and part two. So for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this part two of this really important conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next time back here on Connect to Develop.
You can find more interviews on our YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.